Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hey, we're back with more live from the Heartland for the week of April 22nd. I'm Michael James, and my next guest is someone who I also got to know while we ran the Heartland Cafe up there at the corner of Glenwood and Lunt for 36 years. That would be Jamie O'Reilly, and I first met someone from her family. I met her brother, Bo, when I bought the first sound system for the Heartland Cafe. He had a club or a place out in DeKalb, and I remember going out there, meeting him, and getting some speakers, amplifier, etc. Jamie, you come from a long line of performers. Your family's been very much involved not only in the arts, but also in some politics, newspapers, etc. here in Chicago. I'm really glad that you're coming on the show. I love your voice. I've been listening to your music. And why don't we start by you telling us what was that song we just heard?
Sanctuary City is a song that was written for me when a person who we will not name was in office and our city was targeted. And I believe this song was written by Ann Hills, who's my best friend, the folk singer, and Al.
Oh, yeah.
Howell. And she recast Chicago not as the city of big shoulders, but as a woman, as embracing the people. I just get the shivers thinking about it. It's a stunning song, and it really lays out what we're about, what our history is about, and why it's important to be a welcoming place. So, yeah, very nice song. Love that song.
Well, good. And tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know that we're going to talk about your family, so you can lead into that. I kind of want to know how you got into being an artist performer, and a little bit about your family, that gave you all that support and genes, et cetera, that turned you out to be what you are.
Well, of the 14 of us, I'm number 9 in the family. And I chose to be a folk singer. After college, I went to DePaul School of Music and I learned classical music. And my voice teacher at the time said there was something about my voice that would be suited for Irish music. But also, Michael, it was that I had a really great college professor who taught us a class called Feast or Famine. And it just opened my eyes to the world, as a great teacher will do. And I just became very interested in multiculturalism and in ethnic music and ethnic forms. So I just started putting that together. And, I do songs of the Spanish Civil War and I do songs of the turn of the century. And that's kind of was my start in the early 80s. I've done a fair amount of activism. But this latest show is actually me choosing to make the argument that people that come from a vocal tradition, a musical tradition that's about parlor songs and songs like that are just as, quote, traditionally acceptable in our history as a fiddle player. You'll find that grant organizations and such really kind of look past this great tradition of the Irish orator and the singing tradition. And it was important for me to show that now that I've done the research with my grandchildren, this is the eighth generation of singers and activists that I've been able to trace. And that's what the show is going to talk about, especially the early 1900 incredible period in Chicago that we called the Renaissance, that for which several of my great aunts and uncles and grandfather were part of.
Well, what is this show called?
The show's called In Old Chicago.
And I think I heard you talking about it on our sister station on the Northwestern station.
With Kathy Kelly, right?
Yeah.
And it's grown to be a project I'm calling the Voices of Old Chicago Legacy Project, because this is a period of time where a great deal of families are interested in genealogy. And so I am interested in pointing out to people how valuable their artifacts and ancestry is to them and to their children. And I'm setting up a model of that with the show that I'm doing.
This show will be, where are you going to put the show on? Do you have that figured out?
We have a showcase coming up on April 29th at Rare Nest Gallery in Avondale. And the host and gallery owner is the art historian Keith Bringy, who has a fair amount of connections around town. And we also are going to be performing it as part of the WFMT 70th anniversary concert in May and performing it in Woodstock. And then we'll be bringing it to you, to various museums and such and theaters, because it is a story of Chicago. It's
Tell the listeners who are from not in Chicago a little bit about WFMT, because I know they do a lot of classical music, but they also have the midnight hour number of.
That's
a
right.
lot of folk stuff. Just a little bit on them.
So 70 years ago, my father, James O'Reilly, who was a distinguished actor, was part of the team there. He was on the overnight shift. And he, along with Norm Pellegrini and Ray Nordstrand, they did programming that included our wonderful, wonderful sage, Studs Terkel. So it's it's a heavily cultural organization over there at WFMT. And the folk programming in the variety show is the Midnight Special on Saturday nights. And it's been 70 years. So I'm going to be doing a program for them that you'll be able to hear on May 20th, talking about Chicago studs and performing parts of In Old Chicago.
Well, this In Old Chicago, your new project for 2023, follows another project you just had, which was called Roots in Ireland 2022.
Thank you for mentioning that.
You want to tell us a little about that one? And
absolutely. Well, coming out of the COVID, we musicians needed something to do. And I was reading a fair amount on social media about how we should support small businesses, and particularly women-owned businesses. And so I went to a couple of the women-owned businesses that I know in town, and I talked to them. And one of them is the Trey Kroner restaurant, which is in North Park. Many people love it. And Trey Kroner has had the restaurant in the garden outside even through the winter. So I started doing garden concerts there that I called Roots in the Garden. And in the meantime, I found the journal that I had kept on my honeymoon, and it talked about Ireland. And I thought, you know, what would be really good during this period of time when you're in grief and you're trying to restart your life is to go back and look at the roots from which you came. So I did Roots in Ireland with the plan that I was going to go to Ireland for the James Joyce Centenary, where my sister Bridget was speaking. But because of COVID and family things, I wasn't able to go. So I did it here. And I did it with J.R. Sullivan. We did a version of Ulysses here. And the Roots in Ireland project is started because I was looking at history and the history of the voice that the family has and acknowledging the incredible work that the Irish American relatives I have did here.
Well, you know, one of the things that around this time, I'm not sure of the actual dates, but I know your mom passed away and your good friend Michael Smith passed away. And you did talk about musicians coming out of the COVID and, you know, moving forward. Talk a little bit about your grief and how music saved you in a lot of ways, as it does many people.
Well, I've been an arts coach over the years, and you and I have been associated in a fair amount of projects from people that we know. So I like to put myself in the shoes of the people that are like myself. And for an artist to say, what am I going to do? And what do I have to talk about when we're in such tremendous shifting times? It occurred to me that I should talk about resilience. And so I started making a list of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis to help myself get through. And the first show I did was and is called Tough Broads and Tender Lasses. So I looked at some of the biographies of the great singers that we love, many of whom we know didn't have the easiest time, like Judy Garland and Sophie Tucker and Ella Fitzgerald and Mahalia Jackson. And I integrated them into the show. And the sub-theme was Songs of Resilience, and kind of have done both of those programs, you know, off and on in Old Chicago and that one, to show people that through singing and through the arts, you can actually find your way and be inspired and inspire other people.
You want to tell our listeners a little bit about Michael Smith?
I'd love to. So for you Rogers Parkers, Michael was, a pretty steady act at the No Exit Cafe over many years. And I was his musical partner for almost 30 years. And together we created 5 shows and about 7 records. But mostly, Michael was really a songwriter for himself. And he just really believed in reading. One of the things that's great about him is that you'll find many of his songs are based on great works of literature. And of course, Michael, he did Grapes of Wrath, but he also did things based on Oscar Wilde and Robert Louis Stevenson. And I commissioned him several times for poetry from Gabriela Mistral. Shirley Jackson was an inspiration. So Michael was really literate. And in addition to that, as a pal of Stevie Goodman, he was one of those people that was writing songs all the time. And it's an incredible, incredible partner to have to just expand your mind. And he was steady with it all the way through. He died at 79. So good for Michael.
Well, what do you got planned coming up? I mean, you've got a long list of shows you've put together. You've got a ton of albums out,
Yeah.
and I'm just wondering, well, what's next, as well as what do you do when you're not singing? I mean, in terms, do you cook? Do you go to the gym? What do you, how do you
All of
keep
the
your
above.
spirits up?
I'll answer the second question first, which is also I'm a grandmother, and so I do take care of my grandchildren.
Oh,
And
nice.
during COVID in particular, I was cooking for people and leaving food on the steps. And I swim. That's what I do for exercise. It's really good as a singer. I write a great deal and I do research, but I would say that what's coming up next is that this show, the distinction about In Old Chicago is that it's becoming a multimedia piece. And I'm so proud to tell you that over 5 months, I have interviewed and talked to many Chicagoans and asked them if they have old photos of families coming here as immigrants and collected those photos, and they're part of a video that goes with Sanctuary City. I've also done the same thing with my relatives, and I have pictures from our family dating back to the early part of the 1800s. And that accompanies another song called She Would Sing the Carrie Dances, which is about my Aunt Dorothy, who also lived in Rogers Park. And it's a favorite song of my fans. So I will be continuing to do the research and collecting the images so that eventually the whole show, there's 18 songs, will be accompanied by these incredible pictures that I've been collecting and the stories that go with it. And then hopefully, if enough people get on board, I want to do workshops for other people, other artists who tell me their family member passed away and they left all this stuff and they don't know what to do with it. And I want to talk to people about what you can do with it and how you can make a legacy from your own family stories, which you do, Michael. So you know that story.
Well, I like finding out that you're a swimmer. I have 2 shoulders that don't work anymore, crashed them, and I won't go into detail, but I've been for the last couple of years on a real regular basis, 3, 4, 5 times a week, going in the pool and just running into deep water. And I know how helpful it is for an old guy, 81. And I know that swimming is a great thing, and I'm glad that you're a supporter of the aqua movement, so to speak.
Well, another thing is that musicians like me, we count. So, when you're doing reps or whatever in exercise, you become a count over the years.
Yeah.
I did Middle East, right? When you swim, it's also the repetition and the counting process helps to calm the spirit and prepare you to sing, because we have to clear the palate. When you're a producer like I am, it is nonstop promotion, writing, research, fundraising. I've been an independent for 40 years, and I've worked, as you know, in many, many places in town. But I don't sign up for the big institutions because I don't really support that idea. I support that the artists get paid sooner and better than we are. So when you have something like water as a distraction, it's a great thing.
Water is really a wonderful thing. Without it, we would be nowhere. Um, you had this really big family, and when's the last time you all got together? Do you ever do that? Do you ever pull them all
it's interesting.
together?
Sure. It's been very sad and difficult because of COVID, for the family, because the way that we spent our time in our childhood and all through adulthood was singing together. And I tell people the reason I sang harmony is because there were so many sopranos that sounded just like me. I had to pull myself out to make a distinction. And so we do it in little bits and pieces, and with my grandchildren and my daughter's families as well. But when we come together, it is very special. And we just celebrated my mother yesterday. She would have been 99. And my mother directed theater in Chicago up until the last few years of her life. She ran a senior citizen theater at the Cultural Center for 20 years. She was writing poetry and playing Scrabble the week she died. So we're really blessed with her in terms of our gene pool, and we really miss just getting together and singing. That's what we did. We didn't watch sports together. We sang together.
Well, Jamie O'Reilly, why don't moving away from music or including music, what are your hopes for the city of Chicago? And what might be some suggestions for the new mayor coming in who faces a number of challenges?
I think that what I watched in the last administration that frustrated me was that there was a lot of PR and promotion about a certain way to look at the city. And I don't feel, as a longtime member here, that our viewpoints are seen and heard. And that has to do with the people like you and me who decided to stay here. We have something to say, which includes that we wanted a fully integrated city. We wanted public services. We wanted to not be ticketed for 1 mile per hour over in front of a school, because I feel that the city still taxes the poor. And
Yeah.
among the poor are independent artists like me who are doing community work. I think that our stories as community workers, and you do it, you bring as much attention as you can, and Marguerite does too. Our stories need to be heard, because I think there's a falsehood out there about people giving up. The truth is, we're a city of very strong-willed, dedicated people. And my relatives at the turn of the century were so involved in social justice. My great uncle Tuck was tried and for sedition against World War I. He was one of the original Chicago Five. And they started the Hobo College, which was the first school for immigrants to study English. And my great aunt Mame helped start the teachers union. And my great aunt Nell was one of the founders of the School of the Art Institute students. So it's important for us to recognize that among us are people that are not celebrities and are not wealthies, but that we hang in. And there needs to be more of a context for people to understand that our work is our passion, and there needs to be a little bit more available for the people. That's my opinion. What do you think of that?
I like that. I mean, that's a rap that people could give in any city, in any place, but it's coming out of Chicago. It's coming out of Jamie O'Reilly. I like it.
Thank you.
Well, we got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to let you decide what you would like to share with our masses of people listening or watching.
Well, I think what I want to talk to you a little bit about, Michael, is the family salon, because I host a salon called Root Salon. I started it in the early 90s out of my home. Now I do it at Trey Kroner Restaurant. And this is a tradition that was started. It kind of is like the Bughouse Square folks. So these were people, intellectuals and artists, who would get together in my family's home around Humboldt Boulevard in Cortland in the early 1900s. And the quote from the family is that they were Fenians looking for support for Free Ireland movement, and people fleeing the Tsar with missing fingers. And they would come together and they would find a way to speak to each other and to celebrate. And so I found that in the research. And then just up the street, a few blocks north, I'm continuing that tradition. And for those of you who don't know, the idea of the salon is that it's about sharing in the artistry and the writing, but it's not about exclusivity for the performers. And also, the reason I do it is because too many people my age and older talk themselves about going out because they don't want to go to a parking garage, they don't want to drive at night, they don't want to be with crowds, et cetera, et cetera. And so I made this available through the proprietors there as a BYOB situation for people that just are like really smart gatherings of people that are gifted without all the extra stuff that they used to have to do when they were young.
Well,
So
that's wonderful. I'd love to know about that event. Maybe you'd let me show up one time.
let me think about that. You always show up, Michael. That's part of what you do. That's
Well,
wonderful.
Jamie O'Reilly, I'm really glad we got to do this. It was before I heard you on NPR, not NPR, on Northwestern Station, WNUR. The other day was last Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday.
But before that, I had gotten your email about your upcoming event, which I want you to repeat one more time. And I said, I got to catch up with that woman. And I did.
Thank you. And thank you all for your support of us, we artists. I'm going to perform in Old Chicago with my brother Christopher O'Reilly, Judy Kogan-Heikes, Victor Holstein, and pianist John Erickson on Saturday, April 29th at 7 o'clock. You can go to my website for information. And as part of the deal, there is a cocktail hour before we begin, which is included in the price of admission. So come there and schmooze and see the beautiful art that this gallery is presenting for us as well.
So that'll be a week from this Saturday, the 22nd, on the 29th. And people want to know more about you, they can go to Jamie O'Reilly. That's JamieO'Reilly.com. And there are plenty of videos, etc.
Right. I say Jamie like the Irish boy. That's how you remember me. Yes, please go there. I've written quite a bit on my blogs, and you can read about Michael Smith's songs, which I perform quite a bit. And in this show, we have 5 of Michael's songs.
Jamie O'Reilly, it's great. I'm glad we did this, and we'll see you again in the not too distant future.
Thank you, my friend.